Hi, this is Andy from MPRV News. Welcome to the origins of MPRV News. Unlucky for some, part 13. 2017. Despite the attempts under the surface to bully and cause as many issues as possible for me and Shell's new video channel, we continue to work as hard as we could to give us a solid base to work off. The interviews started to pile up, and we was very lucky early on to get Steve Ignorant on board as part of one of the interviews. When you do a DIY punk channel, Steve Ignorant is one of the icons of the DIY scene from his days singing for Crass. So in many ways that was a must to get Steve on board, and it gave us a solid platform to start building off with our new channel. Due to the fact that Shell lived in Manchester, I was starting to spend more time in Manchester covering the scene there as well as the Birmingham scene. The one thing very quickly early on I noticed was the diversity of the Manchester punk scene compared to the Birmingham one. The Birmingham scene was very much like the Rebellion Festival in terms of it being very much a street punk scene and also pretty much an old scene. And the goers to the gigs all tended to be older punkers and not that many young people. Also, the bands on the bill tended to be mainly the Birmingham bands, and then they'd just have an out-of-town headliner. Sometimes the whole bills were just all Birmingham bands. And rarely did they have bands from Europe. In fact, over the 3 to 4 years, in all the insane amount of gigs I had attended in the Birmingham scene, I think I only saw around 2 to 3 bands from mainland Europe, or in fact anywhere else in the world, play them gigs. There was the odd one or two that play pre-rebellion shows in Birmingham, but the rest of the year it was virtually non-existent for bands from the rest of the world. Other than that, you was just more or less stuck with the big bands like NoFX, Offspring, Green Day, Dropkick Murphys playing these big venues with high ticket prices and high drink prices. But as far as club gigs goes, it was pretty quiet. One of the first events we filmed in Manchester for MPRV News actually typified the diversity of the Manchester scene. It was an all-dayer at the Star and Garter called the Lousy Smart Weather All-Dayer, and the lineup of bands was so diverse it was unreal. On top of that, they had a band called Black Volvo from the Netherlands just to show the diversity of the lineup. Other things I was noticing also was that even early on in the day, people were showing up early to see the support bands and checking them out. And also I was noticing that the actual thing was a fun event. Something that I was going to find down the line was very much part of the Manchester punk culture. In fact, the actual event was themed on The Simpsons. There was even a groundskeeper Willie at the event. Something you don't see at a punk gig every day. On the outside, I was loving every minute of it. I was discovering new band after new band, and it was taking me back to my early years when you buy your first punk record and then you buy a first album of a band that you want to check out. But deep down, in many ways, I was embarrassed. Embarrassed meaning that there was all these bands, and that some of these bands weren't even new bands, they'd been around a while, and yet I knew nothing about them. I was so far behind of the DIY scene that I was, to be honest, embarrassed. In the summer of 2017, things were about to change for the better, and in a big way for MPRV News, and in some ways a shock to both me and Shell. We was covering the Icons of Filth show in Manchester, when in between the bands that they had on the bill, I ran into a guy called Andy Davis. I think at the time I'd only ran into Andy once before. Me and Shell had covered a TNS Records tour show in Stafford. We had in fact interviewed Andy about his band, The Revenge of the Psychotronic Man, at that Stafford gig. And I was learning at that gig that he also ran TNS Records, a label that I knew little about, all the bands on that label. And also that Andy was involved heavily with the Manchester Punk Festival. In fact, to be honest, in April of that year, Shell had mentioned the Manchester Punk Festival as something that maybe we should go and cover. But to be honest, I didn't think MPRV was ready to do that in our early beginnings. I mean, we were still using as the Karaoke Kids microphones. And to be honest also, I was somewhat intimidated by the bill due to the fact that I knew virtually none of the bands that were on that bill. I hadn't heard their music. I was just totally in the dark to this lineup. Right out of the blue, while I was having this quick chat with Andy, this Icons of Filth gig, he just said, "Why don't you come and cover the Manchester Punk Festival?" At first, I thought I'd overheard him wrong. And I went, "What?" And he said, "Come and cover the Manchester Punk Festival." And I went, "Are you sure you want us to cover it?" And he says, "Yeah, I like your work." I was stunned. Really was. We was in a period where people were turning on us. And here was someone I hardly knew that was backing us, to a point where they wanted us to come and cover a major event like the Manchester Punk Festival. And they was actually asking us to come. At that point, MPRV News was born. Sure, we was already going at the time, but we was like a boat in heavy winds and sea without a rudder. In fact, in many ways, a choppy sea. The way people we supported had started to turn slowly against us with what was going on in the background with our previous video venture. I went and told Shell what Andy had told me and invited us to go and cover. And Shell just said, "You probably just heard him wrong, Andy." A few weeks later, we covered the Domestics gig in Manchester. And I approached Andy, this time with Shell with me, and Andy confirmed it. It's strange looking back that I wasn't actually getting a buzz off the fact that we was getting invited to the Manchester Punk Festival. I was actually getting my buzz off the fact that someone cared enough about what we was doing and believed in what we was doing to invite us to come and cover it. Especially in the climate of what we was going through at the time, with people doing their best to bring us down. Little did I know, I was about to be covering the most complete and best punk festival I had ever been to.